Welcome to Growth Purposes Only podcast with me, your host, Princess Serafina. Before we begin, make sure you like, subscribe, and leave comments below. I hope everyone's having a happy and wonderful Thursday. Today, I wanted to get into a topic of surrender. This topic is special and dear to me because I have a tendency to want to control my environment. I struggle with releasing control in every aspect of my life, considering parenting, employment, relationships, and just overall everything that has something to do with someone else other than myself. This is big for me because a lot of tests come from God with allowing Him to lead your way. And I struggle with this because I love to know the outcome of every situation, with that being with jobs, relationships, and just anything that I'm involved in. I actually had a conversation with a coworker today about just surrendering and how hard it is to release control over situations. When we try to dictate things, when we try to control the chess piece, things can get real messy. I'm starting to realize that when I try to control things, that's when the biggest mess is made. It reminds me of the book of Genesis when Abraham and Sarah were promised a son, and they realized Sarah was becoming of old age, and she didn't think that she would be able to bear a child. So Sarah used one of her servants to mate and create a son with Abraham, and they gave birth to a son, Ishmael. And after that, I feel like Abraham began to instill in Ishmael all the things that God was teaching him, so he would be rewarded as an heir, the land, the promised land that he was going to be given by God, and all the gifts that God was going to give to Abraham, he was preparing Ishmael for. But God intervened and reminded Abraham that Sarah was going to bear a child still. So they struggled with believing that due to Sarah's age. And I believe that God allowed them to create Ishmael just to show them his power. So Sarah still was able to conceive, and they gave birth to Isaac. This is relevant to me because sometimes we try to intervene and create our own plans with our lives instead of allowing God to follow through with his own plans. So I struggle with that a lot, especially in relationships. When I think I know better than God, I tend to move the pieces on my own. I tend to create scenarios that may not be fit for me, and in return, I go through trauma, or I go through experiences that don't bear any fruit. So just like Adam had Ishmael, who then began to resent Isaac and taunt him as an infant, I in relationships began to be with partners that weren't necessarily for me, and they began to taunt me and my anointing on my life. So I began to question myself. I began to question my self-worth, if I am who I say I am, because I decided to place people in my life that may not have necessarily been fit for me, just trying to take the place of God. So I've learned to surrender, and it's still something that requires work. It's not something that it's natural to me, just because I'm naturally a control freak, and it's so bad where I need environments set up the way that I can function in. So whether it be my workspaces, my home spaces, my children even crack jokes sometimes about how over the top I am, how organized I am, and that's just my way of feeling somewhat complete because I get to pick my environment. But I have to release that, and I have to surrender in order to be completely fulfilled and for God to completely use me the way he wants to use me and needs to use me. Even with jobs, I tend to want to leave when I'm ready to leave, and then I may not end up in a job or another place of employment that's suitable for me because I made the decision to move before God said move. So I'm learning to surrender all of that control and give it to God. It's very hard because I have to bite my tongue, or I have to put up with certain situations that I wouldn't necessarily put myself in. And I get in my ego and think I'm above certain situations instead of realizing that I'm there for a reason. And my spirit will sometimes realize it after a while, like after I sit back and like really settle into the environment and realize that this is bigger than me, and I began to change my mind about the situation. And then I feel relieved, and I also feel fulfilled because I'm impacting people in a way that I didn't know I could impact them. And then I'm also realizing this wasn't my decision. So I'm learning to trust God and allowing him to work through me. It's a challenge, and I personally feel like every time I surrender, I feel a bigger reward than I would have been able to give myself. And just to go back to Abraham and Sarah's story, that's once Isaac was there, they were able to, fulfill the prophecy that God had for them. Ishmael and his mother were sent away, and eventually, he married and was able to live a life with his circumstances. But Abraham and Sarah now can do the work of God because they waited and they were blessed as they should have, as they were told. So now me and relationships and jobs and friendships, I'm waiting on God to direct me more so. And I realized when you take your hand out of everything, you begin to see God's hand in everything. You begin to see how things work out more than and better than you could have ever imagined. So releasing control, trust, and trusting God, trusting that he has the better plan, trusting that all things work out in due time. So in the spirit of it being Valentine's Day, I've learned to release control in my relationships. I was like previously in a situation where I potentially had like 3 suitors, and I just knew I wanted it to be the person I wanted. And I kind of like took disinterest in the other people naturally because I wanted what I wanted, regardless of maybe how good or bad it may have been for me. And it backfired tremendously. I was in a situation where I am denying other people, and just because I decided that this person was going to be the person, and in reality, that person wasn't the person for me at all. I was out having a smoothie, and I noticed the other person, the guy in question I'm talking about, was with someone else. And I just knew prior to that experience that that person was the one. So it just showed me that I don't get to decide these things, and God will reveal things for you in due time to let you know who's in control. So after that experience, I like completely said, you know what, you got it. You got it, God. Like, I don't want to try to decide anything because you know all, and I can't trust my own emotions. Like, the heart will deceive you. And because I was so emotionally attached to someone else, that I was deceived by my emotions, and I allowed that to dictate my decisions. So now I'm in a place of just solitude and just like realigning myself with God's word. So when he sees fit, I'm allowing him to reveal. So in the meantime, I have just been working, studying my Bible, studying the word, building a closer relationship with God, and just talking to him through everything. Also, I've realized that God will talk to you in so many ways. So I have dreams, and in the moment, I don't necessarily know what my dreams mean. So I'm always like, that was different. Like, what the people are to me in my life, in the dream, in the situation that they're put in the moment, is very hard for me to try to comprehend in the moment, because I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. But then over time, and as time begins to unfold, I get the deeper meaning behind a lot of my dreams. And now I'm at the point of just like listening. I'm no longer trying to decide. I'm just listening, and then allowing everything else to unfold with time. So that has taught me patience, because a lot of time we get some information and we like to make a move instantly off of that instead of just like allowing things to unfold. The saying patience is a virtue is deep, because you become a lot more wise when you allow situations to play out instead of being so impulsive with your decision making. I tend to want to cut people off or end things the moment I feel wrong, but I don't necessarily know what God's teaching me in that moment instead of like taking everything personal. So growing through my wisdom and actually learning from it, because you're not really intelligent until you actually learn from the situations that you've been in. That's what wisdom is to me. So yes, I may know it all, but I've also realized that if I don't learn from it, I really don't know much. So humbling myself and trusting God and being patient with everything, because a promise is still a promise no matter how long it takes. Just like for Sarah and Abraham, she buried a child, I want to say, in her 90s. And today we know that is so uncommon, but through God's will, anything can be done. And I'm learning that the Bible teaches us a lot of stories that relate to our life or a lot of situations that have different meanings. So learning not to take everything literal, and learn, even with dreams, learning not to take my dreams so literal and wait for God to unfold the message for me. And that comes with the surrendering. So not being impulsive, not making the decisions for myself based off what I was told or showed, and then allowing myself to grow through those situations and being more honest with myself about my decision making. Healing is a big part of that. I feel if I was more healed and forgave a lot of situations, I wouldn't still think that certain situations were for me. I get into that comparison theory, and comparison is the thief of joy. So I tend to think that certain situations are better than others because of how they make me feel. And once again, the heart will mislead. So I get out of my emotions and I take a step back, and I really have to like pray and talk to God about my heart and what it's feeling. And that puts me in a place of wanting to just heal, because I tend to think situations are better for me because of the pain I received before, instead of like healing from situations before I get into other situations, and then allowing myself some reflection time to decide like what made me or what led me to that path in the first place, and then surrendering to God and allowing him to make the final say. It's not an easy task. I won't say allowing anybody to control any part of my life has been easy, especially since I was a child and having like daughter and daddy issues, and my dad wanting to control every part of my life. And that's a lot of times that's what happens. Like when you have a consistent behavior, a consistent habit, I think the root or the solution to everything is like deciding where it started. Like what made you come to the conclusion of like, this is what you have to do, or this is what you believe. So when you channel back to the source, such as me having issues with my dad controlling my life, and in return, I wanted to determine everything, and not using my wisdom to realize every time I determined everything, it got messy. Really helped me now in this place to be able to like release that control. Like, okay, the heart is deceiving me and my father is not. And not just like my physical father, but also my spiritual father. So I'm growing in my faith, and I'm really, really trying to surrender complete control. Every day it gets harder, but also every day it gets easier. It's harder because it's everything, every situation is for the first time. I'm experiencing something else for the first time. So releasing control in that particular way becomes harder, but it also becomes easier once I make the decision to do it. Now I know last time this paid off, so this time it's going to do the same thing. So just keeping that positive mindset that it's okay to not control everything. So if I could say anything to my younger self, it would probably be to trust that someone who loves you has your best interest at heart, and not like physically love you, but like protective. Like someone who's willing to protect you truly loves you. That means they're willing to risk their life for yours. And I had to learn that with my dad, like that he was like loving me in a protective way, but it felt like restriction. It felt like it too many no's. And in my adult life, I'm realizing even with God that he loves me because he sent his only son to save me. So with that being said, if he's willing to risk his son's life for mine, why can't I trust him Why can't I allow him to lead me? And also, I realized that in this season, it is important for me to be by myself and surrender to God, because ultimately I do want to be in a relationship. So it's important to practice surrender and to really learn how to, because in a commitment, you do have to surrender sometimes to your partner. You have to compromise. You have to be willing to listen without reacting. And I think all these tests that God are putting me through is ultimately preparing me for a relationship. So I'm learning that being obedient has its rewards for me long term as well, and not just short term for the rewards that God gives me, but also for something I would need from my partner as well. As always, thank you for growing with me. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave comments below, and continue to grow gracefully.